Padre Pio looked at the woman walking back from communion and saw something that made him grip the arm of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He saw Jesus. He could always see Jesus in the Eucharist, could see the living presence of Christ moving from the altar to the soul of each person who received him. But this time, something was different. This time, Jesus entered the woman's soul and did not settle. He did not rest. He did not fill the interior the way light fills a room when you open the curtains. Instead, Padre Pio saw Jesus enter and then draw back. Not leave, not depart entirely, but draw back, the way you draw back your hand when you reach for something and discover it is burning. Jesus entered and found something inside that soul that made the God of the universe recoil. And the woman walked back to her pew and knelt and folded her hands and closed her eyes and had no idea that the communion she had just received was not what she thought it was. If you have ever received communion while angry at someone, while carrying resentment or bitterness or unforgiveness toward any person on this earth, then what I am about to tell you will either save your soul or terrify it. Possibly both. Because what Padre Pio saw that day in the Church of Our Lady of Grace is something that happens in every Catholic church, in every country, at every Mass, every single day. And almost no one knows about it. Almost no one has been told. Because the truth about what Jesus does inside your soul when you receive him while harboring anger is a truth that most priests do not preach, most spiritual directors do not teach, and most Catholics have never been confronted with. I need to tell you something before we go any further, because I almost did this. I almost received communion in a state of anger so hot it could have melted glass, and it was only by the grace of God that something stopped me. It was during the worst of David's illness, when the treatments were failing and the doctors were using words like palliative and comfortable, words that are just polite ways of saying we have given up. And I was furious, not at the doctors, not at the disease, at David. Because David, in his suffering, had said something to me one evening in the hospital that cut so deep I could not breathe. He said, "Maybe God is punishing me for the years I did not believe." And I wanted to scream at him, because those years of unbelief had nearly destroyed our marriage, and now he was using them to explain his cancer, as if God were a debt collector, and the unfairness of it, the theological error of it, the sheer stupidity of it, made me so angry that when Sunday came and I stood in the communion line at St. Osberg's, I was carrying 3 days of unresolved rage at my own dying husband. And as I approached the altar, something stopped me. Not a voice, not a vision, a feeling, a weight in my chest that said, not like this, not carrying this. And I stepped out of the line and went back to my pew and sat down and let the tears come. And I did not receive communion that day. And it was one of the most important decisions of my spiritual life. Because what I learned later, when I read what Padre Pio taught about this, was that if I had received communion carrying that anger, Jesus would have entered my soul and found a locked door. And what happens when Jesus finds a locked door inside your soul is something that every Catholic needs to understand before they ever walk up to the altar again. In the autumn of 1956, a seamstress named Giovina Lettieri came to San Giovanni Rotondo from San Severo. She was 49 years old, a small woman with strong hands from decades of needlework and a face that had been beautiful once, but had been hardened over the past 3 years by a bitterness so constant it had become her resting expression. The kind of face that strangers looked at and thought, "That woman is angry about something." And they were right. She was. Giovina's husband, Corrado, was the youngest of 4 siblings. His older sister, Margherita, had always been the difficult one, the one who kept score, the one who remembered every slight, real or imagined, and catalogued them in a ledger that she balanced with surgical precision. When Corrado and Margarita's father died in 1953, the family property in San Severo, a modest house with a small garden and an olive grove that produced just enough oil to sell at the local market, was to be divided equally among the 4 children. That was the father's will, that was his wish, equal shares. But Margarita had other ideas. Margarita had been the one who cared for the father during his final illness. She had fed him and bathed him and sat by his bed at night when the pain was bad. And she believed, with the absolute conviction of someone who has done hard work and expects to be compensated, that her share should be larger. Not just a little larger, significantly larger. She wanted the house, she wanted the olive grove. She wanted everything except the furniture and the kitchen utensils, which the others could divide among themselves. The fight that followed tore the family apart. Lawyers were hired, letters were exchanged, words were said at a family meeting in the parlor of the old house that could never be unsaid. Margarita called Giovina a gold digger, a woman who had married into the family for the property. Giovina called Margarita a thief, a woman who was stealing from her own siblings. Corrado was caught in the middle, unable to choose between his wife and his sister, slowly being crushed by the pressure from both sides like a stone between 2 grinding wheels. In the end, after months of legal battles that cost more than the property was worth, a judge divided the inheritance according to the father's will, equal shares. Margarita got her quarter, Corrado and Giovina got their quarter, the other 2 siblings got theirs. It should have been over. It was not over, because the legal battle was not the real wound. The real wound was what Margarita had said in the parlor. Gold digger. That word had entered Giovina's soul like a fishhook and had lodged there, barbed and immovable, for 3 years. Every time Giovina thought about Margarita, which was often, the hook twisted. Every time she saw Margarita at a family gathering, which was rarely now, the hook drove deeper. Every time someone mentioned Margarita's name in conversation, even casually, the hook turned and the wound reopened and the anger poured out fresh and hot like blood from a cut that never heals because you keep picking at the scab. Giovina went to Mass every Sunday. She was a devout woman. She prayed the rosary. She observed the holy days. She lit candles for the dead. She put money in the collection basket. She received communion every single week without fail. And every single week she walked up to the altar carrying 3 years of concentrated, distilled, fermented anger at Margarita Lettieri. She received the body of Christ on her tongue and tasted nothing but the bitterness that had become the permanent flavor of her interior life. And she never once considered that there was a problem, because Giovina had separated her spiritual life from her emotional life the way you separate laundry. The anger at Margarita was in one basket, her faith and devotion were in another, and the 2 baskets never touched. At least, that is what Giovina believed. She was wrong. Giovina had come to San Giovanni Rotondo not because of the anger. She came because of her daughter Serena, who was 15 and had begun having nightmares. Terrible nightmares. Nightmares where Serena saw dark shapes in her room and woke screaming with marks on her arms that she said came from the shapes, but that the doctor said came from her own fingernails scratching in her sleep. Giovina was worried about Serena, and had heard that Padre Pio could see the spiritual world and might be able to tell her whether the nightmares were natural or something else. She waited in line for the confessional. She waited for 8 hours. When she finally knelt before Padre Pio, she began to talk about Serena, the nightmares, the dark shapes, the marks on her arms. Padre Pio listened for about 30 seconds. Then he raised his hand and stopped her. "Your daughter is not why you are here," he said. Giovina was startled. "Yes, she is," she said. "Serena has been having terrible nightmares, and I need to know—" Padre Pio interrupted again. His voice was not harsh. It was the voice of a doctor who has looked at the X-ray and can see the fracture that the patient cannot feel. He said, "Your daughter's nightmares are a symptom, not a disease. And the disease is not in your daughter, it is in you." Giovina said, "What do you mean?" Padre Pio said, "How long have you been receiving communion while angry at Margherita?" Giovina felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. She had not mentioned Margherita. She had not mentioned the inheritance dispute. She had not said a single word about her anger, and yet Padre Pio had spoken Margherita's name with the casual specificity of someone reading it off a list. She stammered, It has been 3 years. Padre Pio said, 3 years, 156 communions. I have been watching you. Watching me, Giovina said. I have never been here before. Padre Pio said, I do not need you to be here to watch you. I see souls at a distance when God shows them to me, and your soul has been shown to me many times, because what is happening inside you is happening to your daughter, and children are innocent, and God protects the innocent by showing me the source of their suffering. Hold on, because what Padre Pio described next about what happens inside the soul during communion, received in anger, is the most detailed spiritual vision of the Eucharist I have ever encountered, and it explains something that the Church teaches but rarely illustrates. Padre Pio said, "Let me tell you what I see when a person receives communion in a state of grace. When the host is placed on the tongue and the person returns to their pew and kneels, I see Jesus enter the soul. I see him as a light, not a metaphorical light, an actual light, brighter than the sun, but softer, a light that does not burn, a light that fills. He enters through the mouth and descends into the chest, and from there he expands. He fills every room of the soul, every chamber, every corridor, every hidden corner. He reaches into the places where old sins used to live, and his light cleans them. He reaches into the places where wounds are still tender, and his light heals them. He fills the entire interior of the person with his presence, and for those few minutes after communion, the person is as close to heaven as it is possible to be while still on earth. The saints called this the interior visit, and it is the most precious thing available to a human soul. Now Padre Pio said, "Let me tell you what I see when a person receives communion while harboring anger." His voice changed. It became heavier, as if what he was describing was physically difficult to speak about. He said, "Jesus enters the same way. Through the mouth, into the chest, the light begins to expand. But it does not fill every room, because one room is locked. The person has locked a door inside their soul. Behind that door, they have placed the anger, the resentment, the unforgiveness, the grudge. They have locked it away, sometimes consciously and sometimes without knowing it, and they have thrown away the key. And when Jesus arrives inside the soul and his light reaches that locked door, he stops. He does not force the door open. Padre Pio was adamant about this. Jesus does not break down doors. He knocks, he waits, he calls, but he does not force, because love does not force. And the Eucharist is love. The Eucharist is the most concentrated form of love that exists in the created universe. And concentrated love, confronted with a locked door, does not smash through it. It stands outside and weeps. "That is what I see," Padre Pio told Giovina. "I see Jesus inside your soul, standing before a locked door and weeping. For 3 years, 156 times. You have received him, and he has entered you, and he has reached the door behind which you keep your anger at Margherita, and he has wept. And you have not heard him weeping because the anger is too loud. The anger fills the locked room with noise, and the noise drowns out the weeping of God." Giovina began to shake. She was not crying, she was shaking, the way a person shakes when they have been told something that is too large for their body to hold. Padre Pio continued. He said, "But that is not the worst of it. The worst of it is what happens to the rest of the soul, the rooms that are not locked. Because when Jesus enters a soul and finds a locked door, the rooms he does fill are filled differently. The light is dimmer, the presence is restrained, the healing is incomplete. It is as if Jesus is holding back, not because he wants to, because the locked door changes the geometry of the interior. A soul with a locked room is a house with a blocked chimney. The fire still burns in the hearth, but the smoke has nowhere to go. And over time, the smoke fills the other rooms. The rooms that were supposed to be filled with light are slowly, imperceptibly, filled with the residue of the locked room. The anger leaks, it seeps under the door, it creeps through the cracks, and it contaminates the communion. This is what the Church means, Padre Pio said, when she teaches that receiving communion unworthily brings judgment upon yourself. It is not that God is punishing you. It is that the Eucharist, which is designed to fill and heal and illuminate the entire soul, is being received by a soul that is only partially open, and a partially open soul receives a partial communion. Not because Jesus gives partially, he always gives totally, but because the soul can only receive what it is open to receive. And a soul that has locked a door against another person has locked that same door against Christ, because Christ lives in every person, and when you lock your heart against Margarita, you lock your heart against the Christ who dwells in Margarita. This is the part that most people do not realize. When you refuse to forgive someone, you are not merely holding a grudge against a human being, you are holding a grudge against a member of the body of Christ. And when you receive the Eucharist, which is the body of Christ, while simultaneously rejecting a member of that same body, you are creating a contradiction inside your own soul that the Eucharist cannot resolve. You are saying, I want all of Jesus, while simultaneously saying, I reject this part of Jesus, and Jesus is not divisible. You cannot receive him partially, you receive all of him, or the reception is compromised. Padre Pio said to Jovina, do you understand now why your daughter has nightmares? Jovina shook her head. She did not understand. Padre Pio said, a mother's soul and her children's souls are connected, especially when the children are young. The spiritual state of the mother flows into the spiritual atmosphere of the home, the way heat flows from a furnace into the rooms of a house. When the mother's soul is at peace, the home is at peace. When the mother's soul is in turmoil, the home is in turmoil. And when the mother's soul has a locked room filled with 3 years of anger, the darkness that accumulates behind that locked door does not stay contained. It seeps, it spreads, into the house, into the air the children breathe, into the dreams the children dream. Your daughter is not being attacked by demons, Jovina. Your daughter is breathing the spiritual smoke of your unforgiveness, and her nightmares are the coughing of a child in a smoke-filled house. Jovina was weeping now, not shaking, weeping. The deep, silent weeping of a mother who has just been told that she is the source of her daughter's suffering, that the nightmares that have been terrorizing Serena for months did not come from outside the family. They came from inside it, from inside Jovina, from behind a locked door in her own soul. I've seen it with my own eyes, the way unforgiveness spreads through a family. In my prayer group in Coventry, there was a man whose wife had left him for another man. He carried the anger for years, justified anger by any human measure. She had betrayed him, she had broken their vows, she had taken the children, and he was right to be hurt. But the anger had stopped being pain and had become something else, something that his children were breathing. His oldest daughter, who was 12, began having panic attacks at school. His youngest son, who was 8, began wetting the bed again. The doctor said anxiety, the therapist said trauma. But our priest, a wise old Irish Franciscan named Father Declan, said it was simpler and more terrible than any clinical diagnosis. He said, your children are marinating in your rage, and until you forgive their mother, they will keep drowning in it. Padre Pio told Giovina that the solution was not complicated. It was not easy, he said, but it was simple. And the difference between complicated and simple is the difference between a locked door and an open one. The mechanism is simple. Turn the handle, open the door, let the light in. The difficulty is not in the mechanics. The difficulty is in the will, because the anger feels justified. The resentment feels earned. The grudge feels like justice. And letting it go feels like letting the other person win. But Padre Pio said, this is the lie that the enemy tells every soul who carries unforgiveness into the communion line. He says, if you forgive her, she wins. If you let go of the anger, you are saying what she did was acceptable. If you open that door, you are surrendering your right to be hurt, and every word of it is a lie. Forgiveness is not approval. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not saying what they did was acceptable. Forgiveness is opening a door inside your own soul so that Jesus can fill the room he has been locked out of. It has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with you and God. You are not forgiving Margarita for Margarita's sake. You are forgiving Margarita so that the next time you receive communion, Jesus does not have to stand outside a locked door in your soul and weep. Padre Pio then taught Jovina a prayer. He called it La Preghiera di Rilascio, the prayer of release. He said, this is not a prayer of forgiveness. Not yet, because you are not ready to forgive. Forgiveness is a destination. This prayer is the first step on the road. It is a prayer that opens the lock without requiring you to feel forgiveness. Because feelings follow actions, not the other way around. You do not wait until you feel like forgiving to forgive. You begin the action of forgiving and the feelings follow, sometimes immediately, sometimes after weeks, sometimes after months, but they follow. They always follow, because the soul was not made to hold locked rooms. It was made to be open to God. And when you begin to open the door, even a crack, the soul recognizes what is happening, and it cooperates. It wants to be healed. It has wanted to be healed for 3 years. It was waiting for you to give it permission. The prayer of release has 3 parts, and Padre Pio said it should be prayed every day, ideally before Mass, ideally on the way to the church, so that by the time you approach the communion rail, the lock has been loosened even if the door has not yet been fully opened. The first part is the naming. You say, Lord, I name my anger. I'm angry at Margarita. You do not soften it. You do not explain it. You do not justify it. You simply name it, the way a doctor names a disease. Not to celebrate it, to identify it, to bring it out of the shadows where it has been growing and into the light where it can be addressed. Padre Pio said, an unnamed anger is an unchallenged anger. And an unchallenged anger grows. It metastasizes. It fills the locked room until the room cannot contain it, and it begins to leak under the door and poison everything else. The second part is the offering. You say, Lord, I offer you this anger. I cannot release it on my own. It is too heavy. It has been part of me for too long. It has roots that go deeper than my will can reach, so I am not trying to remove it. I am offering it to you. Take it, not because I am done with it, because you are stronger than it. Hold it for me until I am ready to let it go completely. Padre Pio said, this is the part that most people skip. They try to forgive through willpower, through gritted teeth, through the sheer force of wanting to be a good Catholic, and it does not work, because anger that has lived in the soul for years has roots that human willpower cannot pull up. Only divine grace can reach that deep, and divine grace is accessed not through effort, but through surrender. Offer the anger to God. Let Him hold it. Let Him work on the roots while you work on the surface. The third part is the permission. You say, Lord, when I receive you in communion today, I give you permission to enter every room of my soul, including the locked one. I do not know if I can open it yet, but I give you permission to knock. I give you permission to call. I give you permission to weep at the door, and I give you permission to heal whatever you can reach through the cracks, because the cracks are there. The anger is not a perfect seal, There are gaps. There are thin places where the light can get through if the light is persistent, and you are the most persistent light in the universe. Padre Pio said, if you pray this prayer every day before Mass for 40 days, the door will open. I have seen it happen hundreds of times. The lock does not resist persistent permission. It cannot, because the lock was never made by God. It was made by the wounded heart, and the wounded heart, when it hears the voice of God knocking on the other side of the door, day after day after day, eventually remembers that it was made for openness, it was made for light. It was made for a communion where Jesus fills every room, not just the convenient ones. Giovina prayed the prayer of release. She began that evening in the small guest room at the inn near the friary where she was staying. She knelt beside the bed and she named the anger. She said, Lord, I am angry at Margarita. I have been angry at her for 3 years because she called me a gold digger and tried to steal our inheritance and humiliated me in front of the family. The words came out raw and unbeautiful and nothing like a prayer. They sounded more like a statement to a police officer. But Padre Pio had said to name it without softening, and Giovina did. Then she offered it. Lord, I offer you this anger. I cannot carry it any more. It is poisoning my soul and poisoning my daughter and poisoning my marriage and poisoning every communion I receive. Take it. I do not want it, but I cannot let go of it on my own. Take it. Then she gave permission. Lord, the next time I receive communion, enter every room. I give you permission to knock on the door I locked. I give you permission to weep. I give you permission to heal whatever you can reach. She did this every morning for the next 6 weeks, 42 days. She prayed it on the bus back to San Severo. She prayed it in the kitchen while Corrado ate breakfast. She prayed it while walking to Mass on Sunday mornings, her lips moving silently, the words becoming more familiar each time, the anger becoming fractionally less hot each time, the way a pot of boiling water cools 1 degree at a time when you remove it from the flame. You cannot feel the difference from 1 degree to the next. But over 40 days, the difference is the difference between boiling and warm. On the 38th day, something happened. Giovina was at Mass. The priest raised the host. The bells rang, and Giovina, who was praying the 3rd part of the prayer of release silently in her heart, felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt Jesus enter, not the restrained, partial, dimmed light Jesus she had been receiving for 156 weeks, the full Jesus, the Jesus whose light fills every room, including the one that had been locked. She did not feel the door open. She did not hear a click or a creak or a dramatic spiritual event. She simply felt light in a place where there had been darkness, warmth in a place where there had been cold. And the warmth did not feel like forgiveness. Not yet. It felt like the absence of anger, which is not the same thing. Forgiveness is a positive act. The absence of anger is merely a clearing, a space where something new can grow. But the clearing was enough, because into that clearing Jesus walked, and he filled the room that he had been locked out of for 3 years. And for the first time in 3 years, Giovina received a full communion. And she wept, silently, in her pew, with her hands folded and her eyes closed and tears running down her face. And Corrado, kneeling beside her, reached over and took her hand and said nothing. Because sometimes the most healing thing a husband can do is hold his wife's hand while God heals her soul. Serena's nightmares stopped within a week, not gradually, abruptly. One night she woke screaming. The next night she slept through until morning, and the night after that, and every night after that, the dark shapes vanished, the marks on her arms healed. The doctor was mystified. The therapist called it a breakthrough. Giovina knew it was not a breakthrough. It was an open door. Let me tell you what I do now, because of what I learned from Giovina's story and from my own near miss in the communion line at St. Osberg's. Every Sunday morning, before I leave the house, I sit in my armchair and I do a room check. I close my eyes and I walk through the interior of my soul, the way you walk through a house, checking that all the doors are open and all the lights are on. And if I find a locked door, if I find a room where I have stored anger at someone, resentment at a situation, bitterness at an outcome, I do not receive communion until I have prayed the prayer of release. I name it, I offer it, I give permission, and then I go to Mass. And when I receive Jesus, I receive all of him, in every room, without locked doors, without dimmed light, without the weeping of God on the other side of a wall I built. It's not always easy. There have been Sundays when I stayed in the pew while everyone else went to communion, and people looked at me, and I could feel them wondering, and I did not care, because a communion missed is better than a communion compromised. And a Sunday without the Eucharist, painful as it is nothing compared to a Sunday where Jesus enters your soul and finds a locked room and weeps. You have now heard what Padre Pio saw inside the soul of a woman who received communion while angry. You have heard about the locked door and the weeping Christ and the smoke that seeps into the lives of those you love. This channel exists to bring these truths to Catholics who are walking up to the communion rail every Sunday without knowing what is happening inside them. The Super Thanks button is your way of keeping this message alive, of reaching the mother whose children are breathing her unforgiveness, of reaching the husband whose anger is leaking into his wife's prayers, of reaching the soul who has been receiving communion with a locked room for years and does not know why Jesus feels distant. You are not just supporting a channel, you are opening doors. Padre Pio told Giovina one last thing before she left the confessional. He said, "There is a verse in the Gospel of Matthew that most Catholics have heard, but few have truly understood. Christ says, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar. Go first and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift." Most people read this and think it means you should apologize before going to church. That is part of it. But Padre Pio said the deeper meaning is this: the gift at the altar is yourself. When you approach communion, you are offering yourself to God, your whole self, every room, every corner, every chamber of your soul. And if any room is locked, if any part of yourself is held back, if any door is closed against any person, then the gift is incomplete. You are offering God a house with a locked room, and God does not want a house with a locked room. He wants the whole house, every room open, every light on, every door unlocked. So here is the prayer of release. 3 parts. Say it every morning for 40 days, before Mass if possible, on the way to church, in the car, on the bus, walking down the street, wherever you are. Name the anger, offer it to God, give Jesus permission to enter every room. Lord, I name my anger. I'm angry at this person. I say their name. I do not soften it. I do not explain it. I bring it into the light. Lord, I offer you this anger. It is too heavy for me. Its roots are too deep. Take it. Hold it. Work on the roots while I work on the surface. Lord, when I receive you in communion, I give you permission to enter every room of my soul, even the locked one. Knock, call, weep, and heal whatever you can reach through the cracks. I give you permission. Say this for 40 days, and on the 41st day, receive communion. And notice the difference. Notice how the light fills every room. Notice how Jesus does not draw back. Notice how he settles, how he stays, how the communion you have been receiving for years, the partial, restrained, smoke-filled communion, is replaced by the full, blazing, room-filling communion that the Eucharist was always meant to be. And then write to me, write full communion in the comments below. Because those 2 words are the most beautiful words a soul can say. They mean that every door is open, every room is lit, and Jesus is home, in all of you, not just the parts you were willing to show him. All of you. Who are you angry at? Say their name, not out loud if you are not ready. Say it in your heart, say it to God, and then ask yourself, is this anger worth a locked door in your soul? Is this grudge worth a compromised communion? Is this resentment worth the weeping of Jesus on the other side of a wall you built? Padre Pio said, "There is no anger on earth that is worth a single tear from the eyes of Christ." And every locked door costs him tears. Open the door. Let him in. Let him fill the room you have been guarding so fiercely, because what is behind that door is not worth protecting. It is smoke. And what is on the other side of that door, the side where Jesus is waiting, is fire. Not the fire of anger, the fire of love, the fire that heals everything it touches, the fire that turns smoke into light, and locked rooms into sanctuaries, and compromised communions into the fullness of God dwelling inside a soul that has finally, completely opened every door.